I never thought a pile of firewood and some propane tanks would turn into the biggest legal battle Timber Ridge, Montana had ever seen. But here we are. My name is Howard Mercer, and I have lived on my 10-acre property just outside the Timber Ridge city limits for 8 years. I bought the land specifically because it was remote, peaceful, and far enough from town that I could live the way I wanted. The property came with a modest 2-story house, a detached garage, and plenty of space to do whatever I pleased. Or so I thought. 3 years ago, a developer named Richard Kemper bought up the surrounding land and built Pinewood Estates, a gated community of cookie-cutter McMansions that sprouted up like mushrooms after rain. Suddenly, my quiet corner of Montana had neighbors, lots of them. And with those neighbors came something I had never had to deal with before, a homeowners association. The problem was that my property was not technically part of Pinewood Estates. I had bought my land years before the development existed, and I had no intention of joining their little club. But that did not stop them from trying to enforce their rules on me anyway. The trouble started last October. I had just finished stacking 2 cords of firewood along the side of my garage, neatly arranged and covered with a tarp to keep it dry through the winter. Montana winters are brutal, and I heat my house primarily with a wood-burning stove to save on electricity. I also kept 6 20-pound propane tanks in my garage for my backup generator, my grill, and in case of emergencies. Living this far out, you learn to be prepared for anything. I was out front checking my mailbox when a silver Lexus SUV pulled into my driveway. A woman in her mid-40s stepped out, wearing yoga pants, an expensive-looking puffer jacket, and oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She had that look. You know the one. The look of someone who has never been told no in her entire life. "Hello there," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I'm Donna Ashford, president of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association." "Howard Mercer," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" She glanced toward my garage and the woodpile beside it. Her smile tightened. "I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood and discuss a few concerns that have been brought to my attention. I appreciate the welcome, but I'm not part of your neighborhood. My property is not in Pinewood Estates." "Well, technically that is true," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But your property is adjacent to our community, and we have certain standards we need to maintain for the safety and aesthetic value of the area." I crossed my arms. "What kind of standards?" She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and handed it to me. "These are our community guidelines. As you can see, Section 12 clearly states that external storage of flammable materials is strictly prohibited. Your stockpile of firewood and propane tanks poses a significant fire hazard." I scanned the document and handed it back to her. "Like I said, I'm not part of your HOA. These rules don't apply to me." Her expression hardened. "Mr. Mercer, I understand you purchased your property before our community was established, but we are trying to create a safe, beautiful neighborhood here. Your blatant disregard for basic safety protocols is unacceptable. I've been storing firewood and propane here for years without any issues. I'm on my own property and I'm not breaking any laws." "Perhaps not yet," she said, her voice turning icy. "But I can assure you that the HOA board will be looking into this matter very seriously. Good day, Mr. Mercer." She turned on her heel and got back into her Lexus, leaving me standing there wondering what I had just gotten myself into. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the Pinewood Estates HOA. Inside was a formal notice stating that I was in violation of community standards and had been fined $500. The letter demanded that I remove the firewood and propane tanks from my property within 30 days, or face additional fines of $100 per day. I immediately called my lawyer, a guy named Tom Hendricks who had handled my property purchase years ago. He was a no-nonsense attorney in his 60s who had practiced in Montana his entire career. "Howard, this is ridiculous," Tom said after I read him the letter. "You're not part of their HOA. They have no legal authority to fine you for anything." That's what I told them. "So what do I do?" "Ignore it. Don't pay the fine and don't remove anything from your property. If they escalate this, we'll deal with it, but I seriously doubt they have any legal standing here." I took his advice and ignored the letter. My firewood stayed exactly where it was, and I went about my business. That was a mistake. A month later, I came home from a supply run in town to find a notice taped to my front door. This one informed me that my fine had increased to $2,000 due to non-compliance, and that the HOA was now pursuing legal action against me. They had also filed a complaint with the county, claiming that my property was a fire hazard and demanding an inspection. I called Tom again. This time, he sounded more concerned. "They're really pushing this. I'll draft a response and send it to their attorney, but Howard, you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. HOAs can be incredibly vindictive, especially when they feel like someone is challenging their authority. Let them come. I'm not removing anything." The county inspector showed up the following week. He was a middle-aged guy named Phil who seemed more annoyed about being there than anything else. "Look, Mr. Mercer," he said after walking around my property. "Your firewood storage is completely fine. It's away from the house, covered, and poses no more fire risk than anyone else's wood pile. The propane tanks are stored properly in your garage. I don't know what the HOA is complaining about, but there's nothing here that violates any county codes." He handed me a signed document stating that my property passed inspection with no violations. I thanked him and immediately sent a copy to Tom, who forwarded it to the HOA's attorney. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was splitting firewood in my yard when I heard vehicles approaching. 3 trucks from the local fire department pulled up, followed by Donna Ashford's Lexus and 2 sheriff's deputies. I set down my axe and walked over to meet them. "What's going on?" One of the deputies, a younger guy I did not recognize, stepped forward. "Mr. Mercer, we received a report that you're storing hazardous materials on your property in violation of fire safety codes. I already had a county inspection. Everything passed. I have the paperwork inside." "We still need to take a look," the deputy said. I gestured toward the house. "Be my guest." The fire chief, a grizzled man named Carl Peterson, who I had met a few times in town, walked over to the woodpile in the garage. He spent about 5 minutes looking everything over before walking back to the deputy. "There's nothing here," Carl said flatly. "This is a complete waste of our time." Donna stepped forward, her face flushed, but the amount of flammable material is clearly excessive. "He has enough firewood to last years and multiple propane tanks." Carl turned to her, and I could see the irritation in his eyes. "Madam, this is Montana. Half the people in this county heat their homes with wood. Mr. Mercer's storage is well within normal parameters and poses no safety risk whatsoever. But what if there's a wildfire? All that wood would fuel the flames. If there's a wildfire big enough to reach his property, his firewood will be the least of anyone's concerns. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have actual emergencies to respond to." The fire department left, followed by the deputies. Donna stood there for a moment, glaring at me before getting back in her car and driving away without a word. I thought surely that would be the end of it. The county inspector and the fire department had both cleared my property. What more could they possibly do? I underestimated just how far Donna Ashford was willing to go. In early December, I started noticing strange things happening. My mail went missing for a week. Someone filed a false complaint with animal control claiming I was keeping livestock illegally, which resulted in another inspection that found nothing. Then someone called the zoning office claiming I was running an illegal business out of my home. Each time, I had to take time off work to deal with inspectors and officials, and each time, the complaints were found to be baseless. It was harassment, plain and simple, and I was pretty sure I knew exactly who was behind it. Tom advised me to start documenting everything. I installed security cameras around my property and kept detailed records of every interaction, every complaint, and every visit from county officials. Then, in mid-December, something happened that changed everything. I was driving home from town on County Road 12, the main route that connected Timber Ridge to the highway. As I rounded a bend, I noticed something I had never really paid attention to before. A large fuel truck from Mountain States Petroleum was turning onto a private road that cut through my property's southern boundary. I frowned. That road had been there when I bought the property, marked on the survey as an old logging road. The previous owner had mentioned that it was technically on my land, but had been unused for years. I had never bothered to block it off because nobody used it. But now, apparently, someone was. I pulled over and followed the fuel truck at a distance. The private road wound through a densely wooded area before emerging on the other side of my property, where it connected to another county road that led directly into Pinewood Estates. The fuel truck was heading straight into the development. I pulled out my phone and checked the property survey I had stored in my documents. Sure enough, that entire road ran across my land. According to the survey, there was no recorded easement or right-of-way for that road. It was entirely on my property. An idea started forming in my mind. I drove home and called Tom. "I need you to verify something for me. There's a private road that runs through my property. I need to know if anyone has a legal right to use it." Tom did some digging and called me back the next day. "Howard, as far as I can tell, that road is entirely on your property and there's no recorded easement. If someone is using it, they're technically trespassing unless you've given them permission. And if I wanted to block it off, it's your property. You have every legal right to do that, as long as you're not blocking any public road or violating any access agreements. But I'm guessing there's more to this story." I explained what I had seen and my suspicions about how Pinewood Estates was getting its fuel deliveries. Tom was quiet for a moment. "Howard, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you need to be very careful. This could escalate things significantly. They've been harassing me for months. Maybe it's time they understood what it feels like. Just make sure you do everything by the book. Document everything, and don't do anything that could be construed as illegal." I spent the next week watching that road. The fuel truck came through every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. I also noticed delivery trucks from a propane company, a couple of construction vehicles, and even the occasional resident who was using the road as a shortcut. All of them were driving across my property without my permission. I did some more research and discovered that Pinewood Estates had been built with only one official entrance off County Road 7. That entrance was nearly 2 miles from the highway, which meant fuel deliveries and large trucks had to take a long, winding route to reach the development. The private road cutting through my property shortened the trip by at least 20 minutes and saved the delivery companies a significant amount of time and fuel. I was willing to bet that Donna Ashford and her HOA board knew exactly what they were doing. They had probably assumed that because the road had been there for years, they could use it without asking. Or maybe they just did not care. Either way, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson. I hired a local contractor to install a heavy-duty steel gate across the private road where it entered my property from the south. I posted multiple no trespassing and private property signs, and I sent certified letters to Mountain States Petroleum, the propane company, and the Pinewood Estates HOA informing them that the road was private property and that they no longer had permission to use it. The gate went up on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook. The first call was from the fuel company. The driver had arrived at the gate and could not get through. They wanted to know what was going on. "That road runs through my private property," I explained calmly. "I never gave anyone permission to use it, and I've decided to close it off. But we've been using that road for 3 years. We have contracts to deliver fuel to Pinewood Estates." "Then I suggest you use the main entrance like you're supposed to. That's not my problem." The driver sputtered for a moment before hanging up. The second call was from Donna Ashford, and she was absolutely furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed into the phone. "You can't just block off that road. It's my property, Mrs. Ashford. I can do whatever I want with it. That road has been there for decades. You have no right to close it. Actually, I have every right. There's no easement, no right-of-way, and no agreement that allows anyone to use it. You and your residents have been trespassing for years. This is outrageous. Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost us? Fuel deliveries, propane, construction supplies. Everything has to come in through the main entrance now. Sounds like a problem you should have considered before you started harassing me over some firewood." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and measured. "You're going to regret this, Mr. Mercer. Is that a threat?" She hung up without answering. Over the next few days, the situation escalated quickly. The HOA sent their attorney to threaten me with a lawsuit claiming that I was blocking a prescriptive easement. Tom shot that down immediately, pointing out that prescriptive easements require open and continuous use for 10 years under Montana law, and the road had only been used for 3. The fuel company complained to the county, claiming that I was interfering with commerce. The county informed them that it was a private property matter and they had no jurisdiction. Donna tried to rally the residents of Pinewood Estates against me, claiming I was endangering their safety by preventing fuel deliveries. Several residents showed up at my gate, demanding that I open it. I called the sheriff, and they were escorted off my property. But the real chaos started when winter hit hard. A massive snowstorm rolled through Montana in early January, dumping nearly 3 feet of snow in less than 48 hours. Temperatures plummeted to well below zero, and suddenly every home in Pinewood Estates was burning through heating fuel at an alarming rate. The fuel trucks could not get through fast enough using the main entrance. The long route from the highway, combined with the treacherous winter road conditions, meant that deliveries were taking twice as long. The propane company was struggling to keep up with demand, and several homes in Pinewood Estates ran dangerously low on fuel. My phone rang constantly. Residents begged me to open the gate. The fuel company offered to pay me for access. Donna Ashford left increasingly frantic voicemails. I ignored all of them. Then things took a darker turn. One night in mid-January, I was woken up by the sound of metal clanging. I grabbed my flashlight and looked out the window to see someone trying to cut the lock on my gate. I called the sheriff and grabbed my shotgun before heading outside. The person heard me coming and took off running into the woods before I could get a good look at them. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later and took a report, but there was not much they could do without any evidence. The next morning, I reviewed the footage from my security cameras. The person had been wearing dark clothing and a ski mask, but I could tell from their build and the way they moved that it was a man. He had been using bolt cutters to try to break the lock, and he had almost succeeded before I scared him off. I upgraded the lock to something that would require an angle grinder to cut through and added more cameras. 2 nights later, someone tried again. This time they brought an angle grinder. The sound woke me immediately, and I called the sheriff while running outside. The person managed to cut through the lock before fleeing, leaving the gate hanging open. I was furious. I fixed the gate, installed an even stronger lock, and added motion sensor floodlights that would turn the entire area into daylight if anyone approached. But I also started to worry. This had gone from annoying to potentially dangerous. Someone was willing to commit vandalism and trespassing to get that gate open, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. Tom advised me to file for a restraining order against the HOA and anyone associated with them. We presented the evidence of harassment, the false complaints, and the recent vandalism to a judge. The judge issued a temporary order prohibiting Donna Ashford and the HOA board from contacting me or coming onto my property pending a full hearing. That seemed to calm things down for a few days. The vandalism stopped, and my phone finally stopped ringing. Then I got a visit from the FBI. 2 agents showed up at my door on a frigid morning in late January. They introduced themselves as Agent Sarah Collins and Agent Mark Rivera. They were polite but serious, and they asked if they could come inside to talk. I let them in, offered them coffee, and waited to hear what this was about. "Mr. Mercer," Agent Collins began, "we're investigating allegations of extortion and threats related to the Pinewood Estates community. Your name has come up in connection with this investigation." My stomach dropped. "Extortion? What are you talking about?" Agent Rivera pulled out a notebook. "We've received reports that you've been demanding payment from residents and businesses in exchange for access to a road on your property. We've also received reports that you've made threats against members of the Homeowners Association." "That's complete nonsense. I closed off a private road that runs through my property because people were using it without my permission. I never demanded payment from anyone, and I certainly never made any threats." "Can you walk us through what happened?" Agent Collins asked. I spent the next hour explaining everything. The HOA harassment, the fines, the false complaints, the inspections, and my decision to close the road. I showed them all of my documentation, the security camera footage of the vandalism attempts, and the correspondence between my attorney and the HOA. The agents took notes and asked questions. As I talked, I could see their expressions shifting from skeptical to concerned. "Mr. Mercer," Agent Rivera said when I finished, "do you have any idea who made these allegations against you?" "I'm guessing Donna Ashford or someone from the HOA board. They've been trying to get me to back down since I closed the gate." Agent Collins exchanged a look with her partner. "We're going to need to follow up on this. In the meantime, I'd advise you to continue documenting everything and avoid any direct contact with anyone from Pinewood Estates." They left, and I immediately called Tom to let him know what had happened. He was livid. "They're trying to make you look like the bad guy. This is beyond harassment now, Howard. This is defamation and filing a false report with federal agents. So what do? We go on the offensive. I'm filing a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And I'm going to make sure the FBI knows exactly what's been going on." Over the next few weeks, the investigation intensified. The FBI interviewed dozens of people, including residents of Pinewood Estates, members of the HOA board, and the delivery companies that had been using the road. They pulled records, reviewed emails, and dug into the HOA's finances. What they found was far worse than I could have imagined. It turned out that Donna Ashford had not just been harassing me. She had been embezzling money from the HOA for years. She had set up fake vendor accounts and had been funneling thousands of dollars into her personal bank account. The money was supposed to go toward community maintenance, landscaping, and snow removal, but instead it had been paying for her lavish lifestyle. The investigation also revealed that Donna had been paying a local handyman named Kyle Preston to vandalize my property. Kyle was the one who had tried to cut the locks on my gate. He initially denied everything, but when the FBI showed him the security camera footage and offered him a deal in exchange for cooperation, he confessed. Donna had paid him $500 each time to try to break open the gate. She had told him that I was interfering with essential services, and that opening the gate was necessary to protect the residents of Pinewood Estates. But the worst part came when the FBI discovered emails between Donna and several HOA board members. In those emails, they discussed ways to force me off my property, including filing false complaints, making my life so difficult that I would sell, and even suggesting that they could use eminent domain to seize the road. One email, sent by Donna to another board member, read, "We need to make an example of him. If we let him get away with this, other property owners will think they can defy us too. Do whatever it takes." The FBI arrested Donna Ashford on a cold morning in February. She was charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit vandalism, and making false statements to federal officers. Kyle Preston was charged with vandalism and trespassing. 2 other HOA board members were charged with conspiracy. The news spread through Timber Ridge like wildfire. The local paper ran a front-page story about the arrest, and suddenly everyone in town was talking about the scandal at Pinewood Estates. I received dozens of calls and messages from residents of the development. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. Others thanked me for exposing what had been going on. A few admitted that they had suspected something was wrong but were afraid to say anything because Donna had a reputation for going after anyone who questioned her. The HOA was dissolved pending a full audit of their finances. A court-appointed administrator took over management of Pinewood Estates, and residents were informed that they would likely need to pay special assessments to cover the money that Donna had stolen. Tom and I continued with our lawsuit against the HOA, and Donna personally. We were seeking damages for harassment, emotional distress, and the cost of all the legal fees and security measures I had been forced to take. The case went to trial in May. It was a short trial because the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a verdict in my favor. They awarded me $250,000 in damages, which would be paid from Donna's personal assets after her house and belongings were sold to cover her legal debts. Donna was eventually sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for the embezzlement and fraud charges, plus additional time for the conspiracy charges. Kyle Preston got 18 months and probation. The other HOA board members received probation and community service. As for the road, I eventually reached an agreement with the new HOA board that was elected after the scandal. They paid me a fair price for an easement that would allow fuel deliveries and emergency vehicles to use the road. The money was enough to cover all of my legal expenses, and then some. But more importantly, I made sure the agreement included strict terms. The easement was only for commercial deliveries and emergency services. Regular residents could not use it as a shortcut, and if anyone from the HOA ever harassed me again, the easement would be immediately revoked. The new board agreed without hesitation. They were so desperate to distance themselves from Donna and the previous administration that they would have agreed to almost anything. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The harassment stopped. The complaints stopped. I was finally able to go back to living peacefully on my property without worrying about what fresh hell the HOA was going to throw at me. I kept my firewood stacked exactly where it had always been. I kept my propane tanks in the garage. And every time I drove past that gate on my property, I smiled knowing that I had stood my ground and won. The whole experience taught me a valuable lesson about HOAs and people like Donna Ashford. They rely on intimidation and the assumption that most people will back down rather than fight. They count on people being too tired, too scared, or too overwhelmed to stand up for their rights. But I was not most people. I had the resources, the stubbornness, and the sheer spite to fight back. And in the end, that made all the difference. One afternoon in late summer, I was sitting on my porch with a cold beer when a car pulled up. A man in his 30s got out and walked over. He introduced himself as Jeffrey Dalton, one of the residents of Pinewood Estates. "Mr. Mercer, I just wanted to stop by and say thank you," he said. "My wife and I moved here 2 years ago, and we had no idea what was going on with the HOA. Donna fined us constantly for ridiculous things. Our grass was half an inch too long. Our mailbox was the wrong shade of black. She even fined us because our kid left a bike in the driveway overnight." "Sounds about right," I said. "When you closed that road and everything started coming out, it was like a weight lifted off the whole neighborhood. We finally feel like we can actually live in our own homes without constantly looking over our shoulders. So thank you for not backing down." I shook his hand. "I appreciate that. I'm just glad it's over." He left, and I sat there for a while longer, watching the sun set over the mountains. The air was clear and cool, and the only sounds were the birds and the wind in the trees. This was why I had moved out here in the first place. Peace, quiet, freedom. And now, finally, I had it back. The legal battle had taken nearly a year of my life. It had cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees, countless hours of stress and frustration, and more than a few sleepless nights. But it had been worth it. Because in the end, I had proven something important. You do not have to let bullies push you around, whether they are wearing a ski mask or sitting behind a desk at an HOA meeting. You have rights, and those rights matter. I finished my beer and headed inside. Tomorrow I would split more firewood. I would check the propane tanks. I would live my life exactly the way I wanted to, on my own property, without interference from anyone. And if another HOA president ever showed up in my driveway with a clipboard and a bad attitude, well, I would know exactly what to do. The following months were blissfully quiet. The new HOA board kept their distance and honored our agreement to the letter. The fuel trucks came through on schedule, using the easement I had granted them, and nobody bothered me about firewood or propane tanks or anything else. I did eventually hear through the grapevine that Donna tried to appeal her sentence, claiming that she had been under stress and that the embezzlement was a result of mental health issues. The appeal was denied. She would serve her full sentence. Kyle Preston got out after serving his time and reportedly moved to Idaho to live with family. I never saw him again, which was fine by me. As for the other board members who had been involved, they quietly left Pinewood Estates. One family moved to Oregon. Another couple divorced, and the husband moved to Colorado while the wife stayed in Montana but bought a house in town. The community itself slowly recovered from the scandal. Property values took a hit initially, but they rebounded as new leadership took over and restored trust. The new board was transparent about finances, held regular meetings, and actually listened to residents instead of treating them like subjects in a dictatorship. I even developed a cordial relationship with a few of my neighbors in Pinewood Estates. Not close friendships, but the kind of neighborly relationship where we would wave if we saw each other in town, or help out if someone needed a hand with something. One day in October, almost exactly a year after Donna had first shown up in my driveway, I was stacking firewood when I saw a car slow down on the road. For a moment, my stomach tightened, worried that it was starting all over again. But the car kept driving, and I realized I was being paranoid. That chapter of my life was over. I finished stacking the wood, covered it with a tarp, and stood back to admire my work. 2 full cords, neatly arranged and ready for winter. My propane tanks were full. My generator was serviced and ready to go. I was prepared for whatever the Montana winter wanted to throw at me. And this time, nobody was going to find me for it. I walked back to the house and poured myself a whiskey. I sat on the porch and watched the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was crisp and smelled like pine and autumn leaves. This was my home, my property, my life. And I had fought like hell to keep it that way. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The harassment, the legal battles, the vandalism, the FBI investigation, the trial. It had been exhausting and infuriating, but it had also been strangely empowering. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could stand up to people who tried to intimidate me, that I did not have to accept being pushed around just because someone had a title and a clipboard. I had also learned that there were good people out there willing to help. Tom had been an incredible lawyer and had never wavered in his support. The county inspector and fire chief had been fair and honest, even when it would have been easier to side with the HOA. The FBI agents had taken my complaints seriously and had followed the evidence wherever it led. And the residents of Pinewood Estates, who had reached out to thank me, had shown me that most people just want to live their lives in peace, free from the petty tyranny of power-hungry HOA boards. As I sat there sipping my whiskey, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I had rarely experienced before, not just because I had won, but because I had stood up for something that mattered. I had defended my rights and my property, and I had exposed corruption and abuse of power in the process. If I had backed down, if I had just paid the fine and removed my firewood and propane tanks, Donna would still be stealing money from the HOA. She would still be harassing residents and making their lives miserable. Kyle would still be vandalizing property on her orders. By refusing to give in, I had not just protected myself. I had helped protect an entire community. That was worth more than any amount of money or any legal victory. I finished my whiskey and went inside. I made dinner, a simple steak and baked potato, and ate while watching the news. There was no mention of Pinewood Estates or Donna Ashford. The scandal had faded from the headlines, replaced by new stories and new controversies. Life moved on. The world kept turning, and I was okay with that. After dinner, I cleaned up and settled into my favorite chair with a book. It was a novel about a man who built a cabin in the Alaskan wilderness and lived off the land. Fiction, but the kind that felt real enough to lose yourself in. I read for a couple of hours before heading to bed. As I lay there in the darkness, I listened to the sounds of the night. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. The wind rustled through the trees. The house creaked and settled in the way old houses do. These were the sounds of home, the sounds of peace. I fell asleep with a smile on my face. The next morning, I woke to the first snow of the season. Big, fat flakes were falling gently from the sky, covering everything in a blanket of white. It was early for snow, even by Montana standards, but I was ready for it. I started a fire in the wood-burning stove, using logs from the pile that had started this whole mess. The wood caught quickly, and soon the house was filled with warmth and the comforting smell of burning pine. I made coffee and stood at the window, watching the snow fall. It was beautiful in a way that never got old. No matter how many winters I lived through, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tom. Saw the news about the sentencing appeal being denied. Justice served. Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you need anything. I texted back. All good here. Thanks for everything. He responded with a thumbs up emoji, and I put my phone away. I spent the rest of the day doing the kinds of things I loved. I split more firewood, even though I did not really need it. I tinkered with my truck, changing the oil and checking the antifreeze. I cleaned my guns and restocked my emergency supplies. These were the simple, practical tasks that made me feel grounded and prepared. They were the reason I lived out here, away from the noise and chaos of town. As the sun set and the snow continued to fall, I fired up my generator to make sure it was working properly. It roared to life without hesitation, and I let it run for 15 minutes before shutting it down. The propane tanks that had caused so much controversy were doing exactly what they were supposed to do, keeping me prepared and self-sufficient. I went inside and made a simple dinner of chili and cornbread. I ate by the fire, listening to the crackling logs and feeling grateful for everything I had. That night, I slept better than I had in months. There were no worries about HOA fines or legal battles or vandals trying to break my gate. There was just the quiet comfort of knowing that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, living exactly the way I wanted to live. Over the following weeks and months, I settled back into my old routines. I kept to myself mostly, venturing into town only when I needed supplies or wanted to grab a beer at the local bar. I avoided Pinewood Estates entirely, driving the long way around if I needed to go in that direction. I did hear occasional updates about the community. The new HOA board had implemented reforms, including term limits for board members, transparent financial reporting, and a system for residents to appeal fines and decisions. They were trying to rebuild trust and create the kind of community that people actually wanted to live in. I hoped it worked out for them. They deserved better than what Donna had put them through. As winter deepened and the snow piled higher, I stayed warm and comfortable in my home. The wood-burning stove kept the house cozy, and I barely had to touch the thermostat. My propane tanks were ready if I needed backup heat, or if the power went out, which it did a few times during particularly bad storms. Each time the power went out, I thought about the residents of Pinewood Estates who were stuck using the long route for fuel deliveries. I wondered if they were staying warm, if their tanks were full, if they appreciated the access I had granted them. I like to think they did. One evening in late February, I was sitting by the fire reading when I heard a knock at the door. It was late, almost 9 o'clock, and I was not expecting anyone. I grabbed my shotgun out of caution and approached the door carefully. Through the window, I could see a woman standing on my porch. She was young, maybe late 20s, and she looked nervous. I opened the door but kept the chain latched. "Can I help you, Mr. Mercer? My name is Rachel Stanton. I live in Pinewood Estates. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I was hoping I could talk to you for a few minutes." I studied her for a moment. She did not look threatening, just anxious. I put the shotgun aside and opened the door. "Come in. It's cold out there." She stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. "Thank you. I promise I won't take up much of your time." I gestured for her to sit by the fire and offered her coffee, which she accepted gratefully. "What can I do for you, Miss Stanton?" She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug and took a deep breath. "I wanted to thank you for what you did. I know a lot of people have probably said that already, but I needed to say it in person. I appreciate that, but it was not really about anyone but me. Maybe not at first, she said. But what you did exposed something that was hurting a lot of people. Donna fined my husband and me almost $5,000 over 2 years for things that were completely ridiculous. We were scared to even plant flowers in our own yard because we did not know if they would be the wrong color or the wrong type. That's terrible. I'm sorry you went through that. It's over now, thanks to you. We got most of our money back after the audit showed that the fines were bogus. And the new board actually listens to us. It's like night and day. We talked for a while longer. She told me more about life in Pinewood Estates, about how the community was healing and moving forward. She said that a lot of residents felt like they had been living under a dictatorship and were finally free. Before she left, she handed me a card. Inside was a handwritten note signed by dozens of residents, thanking me for standing up to the HOA and for granting the easement that allowed essential deliveries to continue. I was touched, though I tried not to show it. You did not have to do this. We wanted to. You could have left that gate closed out of spite, and nobody would have blamed you. But you did the right thing, and we appreciate it. After she left, I sat by the fire and read through the note. Each signature represented a person or family that had been affected by what happened. It was a reminder that my fight had mattered to more people than just me. I folded the card and put it on the mantel, where I could see it every day. Spring came slowly to Montana, as it always did. The snow melted gradually, revealing brown grass and muddy roads. The days grew longer, and the temperature started to climb above freezing on a regular basis. I spent my days working on my property, repairing winter damage and preparing for summer. I fixed a section of fence that had been knocked down by a fallen tree. I cleaned out the gutters and inspected the roof. I tilled a small garden plot where I planned to grow vegetables. Life was good, simple, peaceful. One morning in early April, I was working in the garden when I heard a vehicle approaching. I looked up to see a sheriff's cruiser pulling into my driveway. My first thought was that something was wrong, but the deputy who got out was smiling. It was the older deputy, a man named Greg Lawson, who I had dealt with a few times during the whole ordeal. "Morning, Howard," he said. "Got a minute?" "Sure. What's up?" "I just wanted to stop by and let you know that the last of the charges related to your case have been resolved. Kyle Preston finished his sentence and is officially on probation. Donna Ashford's appeals have all been denied, and she is going to serve her full term. The other board members have completed their community service. Good to hear. Thanks for letting me know. There's one more thing." He pulled a document from his pocket. "The judge wanted me to deliver this to you personally. It's a formal apology from the county for the harassment you endured. They acknowledged that the complaints filed against you were baseless and that you should never have been subjected to that many inspections." I took the document and read through it. It was signed by the county commissioner and included a commitment to review their procedures for handling HOA complaints to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. "That's good of them," I said. "I appreciate it. You handled this whole situation with a lot of class, Howard. A lot of people would have gone scorched earth, but you kept your cool and did things the right way. That takes character." We shook hands and he left. I stood there for a moment, holding the apology, feeling a sense of closure that I had not realized I needed. It was really over. Completely and officially over. I went back to working in the garden, planting seeds and thinking about the future. This summer, I would grow tomatoes and peppers and zucchini. I would can some of the harvest for winter and give the rest away to neighbors and friends. I would live my life on my terms. surrounded by firewood and propane tanks and all the other practical supplies that made sense for someone living in rural Montana. And if another HOA ever tried to tell me what I could or could not do on my own property, well, I had a lawyer on speed dial and a story that would make them think twice. But I did not think it would come to that. Word had spread throughout the county about what had happened. Other rural property owners who lived near HOA communities had heard the story and were taking steps to protect themselves. Some had installed gates. Others had surveyed their property lines and posted no trespassing signs. The HOA, for their part, seemed to have learned their lesson. They were being more careful about who they targeted and what rules they tried to enforce. Nobody wanted to be the next Pinewood Estates, caught up in a scandal that made national news. As summer arrived in full force, I found myself happier than I had been in years. The garden was thriving. My property was in good shape. I had money in the bank from the lawsuit settlement. And most importantly, I had my freedom and my peace of mind. I spent my evenings on the porch, watching the sun set and listening to the sounds of nature. Sometimes I would see deer grazing at the edge of the tree line. Other times I would hear coyotes howling in the distance. Once I even saw a black bear ambling through the woods, completely unbothered by my presence. These were the moments I lived for. The moments that reminded me why I had chosen this life in the first place. One evening in July, I was sitting on the porch when I saw headlights coming up the road. The vehicle slowed and turned into my driveway, and I recognized it as Tom's truck. He got out with a six-pack of beer and a grin on his face. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." "Doing great. Come on up." We sat on the porch and drank beer and talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his other cases, about his grandkids, about his plans to retire in a few years and spend more time fishing. I told him about my garden, about the wildlife I had been seeing, about the quiet satisfaction of living exactly the way I wanted to live. "You know, Howard," he said after his second beer, "you're living the dream. A lot of people talk about doing what you're doing, but very few actually have the guts to pull it off. It's not about guts. It's about knowing what you want and not letting anyone take it from you." That's what I mean. Most people cave to pressure. They let HOAs and nosy neighbors and society in general tell them how to live. But you stood your ground and look where you are now. You're free in a way that most people never will be. I raised my beer. "I'll drink to that." We clinked bottles and watched the sun set together. Two men who understood that freedom is not something you are given. It is something you fight for and protect with everything you have. As the stars came out and the night grew darker, Tom eventually said his goodbyes and headed home. I stayed on the porch a little longer, savoring the cool night air and the silence. Tomorrow I would wake up and do it all over again. I would tend to my garden, split more firewood, check on my propane tanks, and live my life exactly the way I chose to live it. And nobody, not Donna Ashford or any other HOA president, would ever take that away from me again. I stood up and stretched, feeling the satisfying ache of a day well spent. I took one last look at the stars, bright and clear in the Montana sky, and then headed inside. The fire in the wood-burning stove had burned down to embers, but the house was still warm. I added a couple of logs and watched them catch, the flames dancing and crackling in the darkness. This was home. This was freedom. This was everything I had fought for. And it was worth every moment of the battle. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, falling asleep to the sound of the fire and the wind in the trees, content in the knowledge that I had won not just a legal battle, but something far more important. I had won the right to live my life on my own terms, and that was a victory that would last forever.